Hello, this is Just Asking Questions, and I'm your host, Marcel. Today we're going to talk about the Emergency Measures Act, just enacted today by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada, February 14th. We're going to examine this act and look at the provisions of it and what it means. But before we do that, there's no question that the Prime Minister can enact the act. The question we're going to look at first is, should he? And we're going to look at that by looking at a little bit of the historical references and uses of the act. So this Emergency Measures Act was first introduced in 1988. This is the first time the act has ever been used in Canada. So even though Alberta, for example, had the huge wildfire that burned a whole town down up north, any floods, snow, any of those other things, this act has not been used. This is the first time it's been used. The only other time that an act like this has been used in Canada during peacetime was in 1970, and that was by Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And that was enacted to deal with the FLQ crisis, which was also called the October crisis. So let me give you a little bit of background, and you can see what type of situation this type of act has been used for before, and you can judge for yourself whether it's if it's justified in this situation. So a little bit of background: the FLQ was called the Front de Deliberation du Quebec. So it started in about 1963 and lasted till about 1970, and it was dedicated to liberating Quebec, taking it out of Canada. So during that time, up to 1970, they had, this was, if you know anything about the 1970s, there was a lot of terrorist groups in Europe, various communist ones, etc. Having different causes they were fighting for. So from 1963 to 1970, the FLQ had done such things as they had exploded about 200 bombs in Quebec, and these were mostly mailbox bombs, and they were mostly in an area called Westmount, which is, if you know anything about Montreal, it's a suburb of Montreal, and it has a large Anglo-English population. So they had about 200 mail bombs blow up in Westmount, including they did various terrorist activities. The biggest one probably was they blew up a bomb in the Montreal Stock Exchange on the 13th of February 1969. 27 people were injured. They also targeted Montreal City Hall, the RCMPs, the Eaton's Company, which was big at the time, the department stores, military recruiting centers, railway tracks, army installations, and in fact, at one point they stole a bunch of dynamite, and they mostly financed their activities by doing bank robberies. By 1970, they had 23 of their members in jail, 4 of them on murder charges. Now, the direct 6 months up to the October crisis and the use of the War Measures Act, there was a couple of things that happened that were significant. So on February 26th, they discovered some guys in a panel van, I believe it was, and they had information. They were planning on kidnapping the Israeli consul, and they had a draft ransom note to kidnap the U.S. consul. So this is a lead up to the October on the same year. So they had various. By the time of the October crisis, October 15th, I believe it was. No, sorry, October 5th. 2 members of the FLQ, they kidnapped British diplomat James Cross from his home, and then they broadcast a manifesto in French and English media to outlets in Quebec. They then kidnap, on the 10th, the Quebec Minister of Labor, Pierre Laporte, while he's playing football with his nephew on his front lawn. They broadcast another letter from the CBC broadcast a letter from him to the Premier of Quebec from captivity. So this is when the next day the military sends out the Royal the 22, the French regiment, to protect federal property in Montreal. October 13th is when they have the famous, if any of my American listeners, you'll be there's a famous part with Pierre Trudeau on TV where a reporter asks him, how far would you go? And Trudeau looks at him and says, just watch me. That's quite a famous quote. So by the time the 16th is when the 15th there's a vote. Quebec agrees. Basically, all the parties in Quebec agree that we need to use the War Measures Act. 16th, it actually comes into effect. On the 17th, the FLQ announces that they executed Pierre Laporte. Okay, so he's executed. So the War Measures Act, carries on until it is ended formally on the 23rd of December. The Prime Minister announced that he's going to withdraw all the troops by January 5th. So it lasts about 3 months. During that time, there is a number of operations that go on. The FLQ makes demands for the release of political prisoners. The army is called in. They arrest almost 500 people are just arrested and held without charge. I think it's 490 something people are arrested. Finally, after being held hostage for 62 days, the James Cross, the British Trade Commissioner, is finally released after these ongoing negotiations. 5 of the known kidnappers are granted safe passage to Cuba by the government of Canada after approved by Fidel Castro. And they're flown to Cuba on the Canadian Forces aircraft. And that pretty much ends the situation. Now, a little bit of background to this. So the Parti Québécois they are the party that has a provincial party in Quebec who have always pushed for separation from Canada. So in 1976, some 6 years later, they finally win the first. They are elected with large enough of a government in order to form the government. So this is the first time they form a government under René Lévesque. So there is some thought in Canada that even though everybody agreed at the time that this needed to be done, René Lévesque did not agree. He felt that it was it was a bit of an overextension by the government. By 6 years later, his party forms the government in Quebec, and this heralds in 15 plus years of this back and forth between Canada and Quebec. Will they leave? Will Quebec leave? Will they not leave? Referendums and all kinds of things. So basically 15 plus years of political stability, or political instability, I should say. Even though these guys were terrorists and they killed and kidnapped people, most historians believe that the use of the War Measures Act had some effect on what's going on politically in Canada for the next 15 years, and the political instability and the attempts to try to of Quebec to leave Canada. So I hope you enjoyed this part 1 of the video, and you can think about what's going on now and what has happened now, and look at what happened the last time that this act was used, and decide for yourself if this is justified. Thank you.